This video is not for people who think that Sogyal Rinpoche did nothing good. But the truth is that for me there was an enormous benefit for the time that I spent as Sogyal's student and in Rigpa. Now that's not the same for everybody, okay? We all had different experiences and it really depended so much on how we engaged with the teachings, how much other Dharma teachings we studied, and how close we were to Sogyal Rinpoche, and at what stage of our path we became close to Sogyal Rinpoche. It's become clear to me that some people really did gain practically no benefit. That, if you were taken into Sogyal's close inner circle when you had hardly any teachings to support you and no solid practice behind you, and you got spat out the other end, traumatised, then those people gained no benefit. They gained only harm. The people that worked closely with Sogyal had no time for personal practice. They were told that their practice was working with Sogyal, but that was abuse. They were abused. I probably got the best out of Sogyal in that I was not that close to him. The times that I did interact with him he was kind and helpful. And the practice and study that I did at home by myself. I live in a sort of a retreat situation. And most people didn't have that kind of lifestyle that enabled them to do the amount of study and practice that I did. I was so inspired when I first found Buddhism, and honestly it probably wouldn't have mattered which teacher I came to. It was all new, it all felt like home to me, and I just studied avidly and I read widely, and I was in semi-retreat for 12 years, and during that time I completed my non-dro and 2 of the 3 routes. So I did a lot of Vajrayana practice and I loved it. There's a lot of people that when they hit Vajrayana practice, like it's just not them, it just doesn't connect. But for me, the visualization I just found really interesting and exciting and powerful, and the accumulations made me actually practice. It was like, okay, I have a goal. And I don't think I would ever have done the amount of meditation that I'd done if I was just sitting, because I found just sitting boring. I mean, now I can just sit. But when I first started meditating, I just fell asleep. So Vajrayana practice for me it was interesting. You actually had something to do. But of course, with Vajrayana practice, you have to really understand what you're doing. I mean, Vajrayana practice is a way to get you to see the Buddha in everything all the time, and to see emptiness and form and emptiness and form, together all the time. So. But to do that, it's like if you take it on the surface, it's not going to do that. If you take it on the surface, it's just shamatha practice. But if you understand what the nature of the deity is that you are focusing on and what is coming up in you, what you're arising as, then it's vipassana and shamatha together. And it does lead you to a one-taste state. So you get into this state where the world actually looks that way to you, and then you just keep accumulating, which is a way of keeping you in that state. And then at the end, you dissolve it all, and everything just dissolves. So I think I got the best out of Sogyal and Rigpa. They provided a structure for me to educate myself. They provided a lot of the education. I found Sogyal's teachings accessible, and what I really liked was that he went for the main point. What he'd picked up from his childhood and from translating from Dzogchen Rinpoche was the essence. That's what he taught. He taught the essence. Buddhism can be very complex. You can get sort of hung up on details. And though the details are important, I was studying the deep details through other material that I was studying, books mostly, and CDs from the Shedra. But he gave us the main points, which helps you realise what the main point of it all is. We did not study Madhyamika, not the general Rigpa population, was a serious gap in the curriculum. I mean, I was lucky in Australia because they did have a short Manjamika course, which was better than nothing, but I don't think they had it in other countries. And I studied it, outside of Rigpa anyway, so I actually did get that education, but most people didn't. So I'm well aware of what I didn't get from Sogyal, and I'm well aware of how he misused the teachings on devotion for his own purposes. I've just come back from the Sakadita conference, and it was during my interactions at the conference that I realised that I have a fairly solid Dharma education. I was able to talk with people from different traditions, and I realised that I knew something about all these traditions. Tibetan Buddhism teaches you about all the different yanas, all the different forms of Buddhism. And I actually checked with some people from the Theravada. It was like, okay, this is what I learned about the Theravada. Is this true? So I realised that what I was taught was basically true, and I had this broad view of the path that you wouldn't get if you just studied Theravada or Mahayana. So, and that is the beauty of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. You do study all the different yanas. Yeah, so talking to all these different people made me appreciate the education in Buddhism that I had had. And it also made me appreciate the practice that I had. Now, that was my practice. I did that, but Sogyal inspired me to do that. I'm pretty sure I got the best of what Sogyal had to offer. Other people got the worst. And for everyone, their experience was individual, different. The interesting thing is that because I had this deep experience of Vajrayana and this deep appreciation for the tradition, and I ended up being someone who has publicised all the negative stuff, it does keep me balanced. I can now not reject the whole thing. It's a real tragedy when someone is so harmed by the Dharma that they cannot have anything to do with it anymore. And, that is probably the greatest harm. In terms of the Buddhist teachings, that is the worst karma that Sogyal has to carry. That he's actually turned people right off the Dharma. That they cannot practice Dharma because it re-traumatises them. That is a great, great tragedy. And on the other hand, it provided the inspiration for me to do the deep practice that I did do. And then there's all the different experiences in between that. So in no way does those who've had a very positive experience with Sogyal, in no way does that balance out or excuse the way he treated those around him. It does not. It simply does not. But I feel I have to share this aspect, just for balance, just so we don't distort things by hearing only the negative. And I do think Sogyal had a sort of natural talent for Dzogchen, if you like. I mean, obviously he was very underdeveloped and emotionally, and he had psychological issues. He wouldn't have behaved like he did if he had been a well-balanced individual. But I do think you can be highly developed in some areas and, really underdeveloped in other areas. It's a fairly known thing. When teaching formally, Sogyal was very careful to give us the actual teachings, and I followed his words. I followed the Dharma. I didn't follow him as a person. When I sat and had introductions to the nature of mind with Sogyal, it was wisdom mind to wisdom mind. And that's what the teachings say. It was not Sogyal to Talia. That's not how it works. Yes, I had devotion. Yes, I needed that openness. I don't like the word devotion. I think it has all these overtones that are completely unnecessary. But I did have the openness and the respect towards the tradition, if not for him as a person. And I always felt that openness and respect and devotion was for the best of him. And that's what they say when they talk about, guru yoga and having this relationship with the teacher. You see the best, you see the best of them. Now, that doesn't mean that you should ignore the bad. And unfortunately, the way the teachings were put into practice in Rigpa, it was ignoring the bad. But I don't think that's how it's meant to be. I think that's how people interpret. It's like a fundamentalist view of texts. You take them at face value. It's a fundamentalist way of viewing things. And I mean, all the unhealthy side of it I go into in my book, Fallout. So what I'm talking about now is not that unhealthy side. And Rigpa did push that unhealthy side away. They bypassed the whole thing, as a community. And, their efforts to sort of keep going as if there's not been a problem apart from people actually talking about the problem. It shows that the organisation is still, trying to basically bypass this dark issue. Sogyal was convenient for me. He came to somewhere that I could go to. In Australia, you don't have the kinds of choices that you have in America and in Europe for choosing teachers. Not many of them come here. But he did, and he came every year. So this was who I had to work with. I could see he wasn't enlightened. I could see he wasn't, he was sometimes not a nice person. But I didn't project enlightenment onto him. I did project father figures shit. I did bring stuff to the relationship that wasn't healthy. But at the same time, I managed quite well. So I related wisdom mind to him, and that's how I saw the Dzogchen. That's how I saw him as a Dzogchen teacher. That's how I saw him in my practice. Not him as a person, but him in his Buddha nature, as his wisdom aspect. And we all have that. I had this conversation with someone once, and they were going, no, there's nothing good in him at all. He's a narcissist. There's nothing good in narcissists. And, I could see that view, but honestly, simply having done the practice that I've done, I've experienced the goodness at the core of my being. Even when I thought from my childhood that I'm hopeless, there's something wrong with me, I have to be fixed, all that stuff that comes from a sort of Christian upbringing. When I practice, when I really sit in practice, I feel the Buddha nature in me. And that's what Vajrayana practice does for you. It's empowering. It's incredibly empowering because you sit there and you are a Buddha. You're the deity. You experience that and it's real. It is incredibly empowering. So that it disempowered people is a great tragedy because it's the absolute opposite of what Vajrayana should do. And then the Dzogchen is the same thing. It's the greatest empowerment to recognise your true nature. And for some people, Vajrayana practice can be spiritual bypassing, but not for everybody. When I came into Vajrayana, I already knew what baggage I brought with me. I knew what my issues were. So when I did Vajrasattva practice, for instance, and the healing nectar goes through you, I could consciously use that to work on my self-esteem issues. So the nectar was dropping away my childhood baggage. That was part of how I used it. But if you're not aware of your childhood baggage, it can just be a complete spiritual bypass. So it really depends so much on what you bring to something. But at the same time, this is a story of the dog's tooth, which Sogyal used to love to tell. He told it so many times. And it tells how your devotion, even to something not worthy of your devotion, can have very strong effects. That even with a bum teacher, if you've got the devotion for the teachings, then you'll get some, you can get benefit out of it. I had a dog's tooth, but I could see his Buddha nature. And he did display his Buddha nature in the times where he had the formal setup and he was playing the role. Okay, it could have been a complete show And some people say, yeah, it was just a performance that he put on. Fine. But he did a good performance. And I know as a performer, I spent years as a performer. There's this magic about performing where you are the character. You know, it's not you playing a character anymore. If you're a really good performer, you are the character. That was what makes a great actor. Great actors have no ego. You know, they just put their ego, at least for the time that they're acting. You step outside of your ordinary self and step into the ordinary self of a character. And I think that's what Sogyal did. And he was open enough and he had enough respect and devotion for his teachers that he kind of channeled them. And he often used to, talk about Dzogchen Rinpoche and say that when he started to teach, he used Dzogchen Rinpoche as his model. And honestly, I think, that's what happened. So we got through him, we got something of value. We got something of enormous value. So don't look at Rigpa people and think that they don't have a good education. The way the Vajrayana is designed, and this is something that Sogyal emphasised too much, I think, is that the experience you have with your teacher of the nature of your mind is then associated with the teacher or the concept of Lama. So in your practice, when you practice and you have Lama in your practice, you can remember your teacher, but what you're really remembering, what that remembrance should do is invoke in you the nature of your own mind. Now, if your symbol is him as a person, it's limited. And that's why they say see him as a Buddha, right? If you see him as a Buddha, you get the benefit of a Buddha, okay? That doesn't mean he's a Buddha. It doesn't mean you actually think he's a Buddha. It means you connect to the Buddha in him. At least that's what I did. And maybe because he obviously to me wasn't a Buddha, maybe that was really good. That was really good because I had to find the Buddha in him in order to do the practice. And that's the whole point of it, is to see the Buddha not just in your in your teacher, but in everybody and in yourself. But anyway, the system of Vajrayana, and particularly the way Sogyal wanted us to use it, depends on the Lama. And so you can get quite attached to the Lama. And that's the problem. The way it was in Rigpa, we got very attached to the Lama as a person. And that's not helpful because you're not supposed to be getting attached to a Lama. You're supposed to be dropping all your attachment. And I think it becomes actually an impediment to your Dzogchen practice, which it's not supposed to do. The term Lama comes to mean the nature of mind for you. So in the practice, when it says Lama, the Lama is your nature, the nature of your mind, and the nature of your Lama's mind, and the nature of everybody's mind. But it's very, very easy to get that stuck on a person. If you sort of can't make this distinction between someone operating from their Buddha nature and someone as an ordinary person, then you will just think it's all bullshit, And Sogyal had no power and no qualities at all. But we all have good qualities and we all have bad qualities, and he's no different in that respect. I have no doubt that some of us got genuine introductions to the nature of mind. And that may not have been any quality of Sogyal apart from his devotion to his lamas. And that's what he said. I think at those times he was being really honest. He said that his path was devotion. And because he had that devotion to his lamas, this is actually true. It's like I've looked at this, I've examined this, and it's the only way he did transmit that to us was through his openness to his masters and to everything that they represented. And that brought out the very best in him. And he said that, and it's true. It did bring out the best in him. And some of us got that. And the whole structure of the Vajrayana, the atmosphere, the expectation, all of this, fostered that recognition. So what I'm saying is that was genuine. And even if sometimes we were in trance states themselves are not bad. They can be stepping off points. And I don't know how trance states equate with various shamatha states. The thing about trance states and shamatha and, basic meditation is that you are very open, and so you are open to manipulation. And there was we were manipulated when we were in that state. So whether it's trance state or just sitting in very open shamatha, when we were told while we were watching Sogyal abuse people, to just drop whatever came up and don't acknowledge your gut feelings that this was wrong. We were being trained to see harm as kindness. So that was where the trance states were actively misused to kind of brainwash us into this twisting of our perception. But the trance states in themselves, if that's similar to, just shamatha sitting in the nanas, then that's fine because it's a stepping off point. So it's the way people can manipulate you when you are in those really open states. That's the problem with those states, not the states themselves. So the Vajrayana system supported this recognition. It helped it to happen. And then, he gave teachings on Sixamnetic. And the notes that we got from Rigpa, those little booklets, they are gold. Because he pulled out the essence. And that's what he did for me. Because I'm one of those people who responds to the essence. I need to be able to slough away all the extraneous stuff and just get to the guts of it. And that's what he did. So I think what happened with me was I followed the teachings. I didn't follow the teacher so much. The purpose of this video is just to maybe encourage you to do what I did, particularly during the conference, which is to recognize what you have learned. And even if what you have learned is to stay away from, is how to recognize a cult and stay away from one, well, that's, that's a learning. But in terms of the Dharma, however much education you did with Rigpa, you did some education and you did learn stuff. And there was a difference between what was said and how it was lived. And if you follow the Dharma, you can't go wrong. Because people say, well, what am I going to keep and what am I going to throw away? You can throw away the religion. But the truth of Dharma, once you've learnt it, once you've recognized that it's truth, it'll be in you. I can't unknow the truth. The Dharma will always be with me. It's in my heart. It's in the way I see the world. So that's what I got from my time with the Sogyal and Rigpa. And at this stage, 2 years on from the shock, horror of realizing that the true nature of our Lama, we might be at a state where you can step back and go, all right, okay, I'm never going to forget the bad. That's etched in there. But at the same time, in order to look at the situation genuinely as it is, then you need to see all of it. Okay, so that's it for now. I'm sorry this is really kind of long, but the subject matter just kind of seemed to need all of that. So, yeah, I encourage you to do your own examination.